right, so before we do get started, we do want to make mention of sharing the experience on our social channels. So you have the handles there where you can do that. We'd like to start, as we always do in the rainforest, by acknowledging the lands that we work, live, and play upon. And so for those of us in the Calgary region and here live today, that is the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3. And for all of our friends in Edmonton up north, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Treaty 6 territory of the Cree, the Dene, the Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis. And if you're in another territory, please do share that in the chat. And that would be great. Okay, how's the slides looking, Amber? We'll just do a quick intro to the rainforest.
What does it take to realize an idea? Or for a seed to sprout? At Rainforest Alberta, we know the answer is rooted in trust. Traditionally, Albertans have cultivated their ideas in established systems. Inputs that don't fit these systems are weeded out. Opportunities for growth are missed. But now, Albertans want a dynamic landscape that can evolve organically, like a rainforest. At Rainforest Alberta, we believe a culture of trust is the fertile soil where ideas grow. Our budding innovation ecosystem is a network of relationships pulling each other up as they push forward in their own field. Trust breaks down barriers. An open, inclusive network increases collaborative innovation. Successful breakthroughs inspire new ideas. A cycle begins. Rainforest Alberta is a movement to amplify trust by cultivating honesty, inclusion, and accountability. How? Our social contract holds us accountable to demonstrate trust across the province. We meet to have honest conversations around collaboration. This leads to more inclusive spaces for everyone to fearlessly build new ideas together. By raising the standard of trust, Alberta's ideas, talent, and resources can be evergreen. Visit rainforestab.ca to sign the social contract and start growing together.
That video never gets old for me. I hope you all enjoy it too. Our social contract is live, written here for everybody to check in with and reflect on. I just want to ask if there's anyone new to the rainforest today. Anyone first time? Welcome, welcome. For those who have been around, please make sure we reach out to our new friends in the rainforest. And I didn't ask online, are there newcomers online? We have just over 40 people tuning in online, which is awesome. Give a thumbs up if you're new to the rainforest, and we'll be sure to welcome you appropriately in the chat. So before we hear from Ty today, we just have a special guest that I want to make mention of. Louis D. I'm gonna catch him off guard. If you don't mind coming down, Louis is from State. He is the winner of the best overall grand prize of the How to Change the World program that was ran at State in the fall. His winning group was supposed to share with us back in January, and unfortunately that didn't happen, but we have him here today, and he's gonna tell us a little bit about his winning project.
Thank you very much, Miguel. This is quite a pleasant surprise, and I got caught off guard, to be honest. I'm Louis D, and I'm taking architectural technology in State, but I'm graduating soon. Oh, I'm there. Nice. And I'm a licensed registered architect in the Philippines. So last year, the How to Change the World Sustainable Development Growth, they conducted a design competition here in Calgary. And not just here in Calgary, but also in different countries. So they conducted a global competition around the world. And there are a lot of people, students, even experts who joined the said competition. And we got lucky enough to snatch the prize of the best overall grand prize. And yeah, our proposal project for that design competition is a vertical farming system component integrating a secondary elementary school in Colombia, Ibagué, Colombia. So, yep, that's all.
Thanks for sharing with us. And if anyone has any questions or want to hear more about the project, we can catch you in the networking at the last half of the hour. Sound good? Okay, thanks, Louis. Thanks for sharing. Awesome. Okay, well, let's get to it. Today we have Dr. Ty, the neuro guy, McKinney. I'll let him introduce himself further, but he's going to share his founder story in founding Bit Cortex from the lens of the social contract. So Ty, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. It's my pleasure to be here. To those who might not know me, I'm Dr. Tam Mckinney, the co-founder for co-founder for Bit Cortex, and also the research director for Branch Out Neurological Foundation. So you might have known me around the space from that way. So I'm excited to share our story today through the lens of the social contract. And we're having a couple technical difficulties with the slide. So I'm going to be looking behind me to figure out what slide is being presented. So please bear with me for that. I'll go to the next slide, please. So we thought that we'd start off by telling our story right from the very beginning. So next slide, please. So our story actually begins in 2019 in the fall. So two very important things happened back then. The first of which is that I was participating in a hackathon competition in my identity with Branch Out. And I proposed a challenge, and I got to meet my co-founder, Shannon Snaden. She was doing her MBA at Haskayne at the time, and we got paired up on the same team. And we realized that we could work really well together in this capacity. We had a bit of a shared interest in wanting to make things better for those struggling with mental health challenges. The other thing that was really important that happened during that time is the first COVID-19 cases were starting to be detected. So we're going to see why that's actually really critical for our story in just a moment. Next slide, please. Next one after that. There we go. Oh, that one more back. Ooh, that doesn't look as pretty as it looks on mine. The good thing is this slide was actually not meant to be interpretable. So this is a figure from a paper that I published on some statistics I was learning about during my PhD. And I had this idea that it could be very useful for getting a better sense of how people are doing with their mental health on a day-to-day basis. So if you don't understand what's going on in this slide, don't worry, 99% of people don't. And this may not come as a surprise. We didn't win that hackathon competition kind of as a result. The idea was kind of half-baked at the time. But my business partner and I learned that we did have a good working relationship, so we continued on wanting to try to advance this idea. Next slide, please. So fast forward about 6 months, COVID-19 is now in full swing. We're all in lockdown. Basically, my responsibility disappeared overnight. I was running a research study at the time with older adults who were really high risk for COVID, so that wasn't happening. So I had an abundance of time on my hands, as did my co-founder. So we decided we wanted to try to pursue this idea a little bit more now that we had a chance to reconnect. Turns out there's a little bit of money still on the table from that hackathon. They pivoted into this other organization, NeuroNexus. It's the same organizing group of people, and they put out a call for a COVID-19 special research initiative for trying to do some sort of innovation around how we could make a difference in COVID. So we wanted to try to take that idea and give it some new life. And in particular, we got a lot of enthusiasm around the idea of trying to gamify the process. Through my experience doing research, I learned that people don't actually like filling out surveys. This may come as a surprise to a few of you. So we thought, what if we can gamify this and make it a little bit more engaging and fun for people to complete these daily check-ins? And during this hackathon competition, we were able to meet Araz, who is the third founding member of our team. So now we had the trifecta, and we had a hipster, we had a hacker, and we had a hustler. So we're now investable. Just kidding, a little more way to go for that. And the important thing is that because COVID is going in full force, for the first time in a really long time, the culture is really starting to change around and realize that mental health was important. Now, a lot of people are having their mental health challenge in ways that they never had before. So there's the shared appreciation for how important it was, whether it was a consequence from the isolation from the lockdowns, it was a medical consequence of COVID itself, or the economic impacts of the lockdowns for people's financial well-being. Overall, we anticipated there was going to be a tsunami of mental health challenges over the up and coming years. And we really wanted to build technology that could help address that problem in some capacity. Next slide, please. So Shannon and I started doing a bunch of customer discovery research. So we had this idea that there was this technology that could be helpful, but we didn't quite understand the problem just yet. So we started doing a whole bunch of customer discovery. And this is where the first rainforest social contract value comes in, which is listening. So we really just started listening to what challenges people were experiencing. And in particular, found that these challenges really popping up in the workplace itself. So on the slide behind me, I'm quoting a study where they looked at Canada-wide, and they found that on average, each company is being charged approximately $3,800 per year per employee for the cost of depression in the workplace. And this is broken up into a few different sub-costs. The first one is absenteeism. So this is where you just don't show up to work for whatever reason. In this case, you're having a really bad time with your depression and just decide you're going to take a day for yourself. So obviously you're not productive that day. So the company's losing out money, you're having to take a sick day. So that's a cost that's being charged to the company. The other way that's a little bit more impactful is what's called presenteeism. This is where you're not feeling good, but you show up anyway, but you're not at 100%. You're only firing on half your cylinders. So you're not particularly productive, but you can still kind of fly under the radar this way. And the study actually estimated that presenteeism is a much bigger cost towards companies, towards that overall 3,800 compared to absenteeism. So really underestimating how important it is for us to be fully present in the workplace if we want to be effective and productive. And while we're doing this customer discovery process, we learned about a couple other costs that go along with it, namely turnover. So lots of people might take a leave of absence due to stress, and a lot of people don't return back to their positions after that. So these are also really big costs that are incurred on companies. And then as well, just high cost mistakes. So you're not in the right mind, you screw up a deal, you make a mistake with some code that's being submitted, and it ends up being costly for the company to be able to compensate this. So this is all to say that when mental health challenges sneak their way into the workplace, not only is the individual struggling deeply affected, but it's also the companies and the rest of the teams around it. And this more or less places a tax, a burden on the entire innovation ecosystem. Next slide, please. So over the course of that hackathon, now that we had met Araz and a few other really good student volunteers, we had a prototype of our first iteration of our app. It was a game that people could play where, as you can see, you're trying to dodge those rocks, you're sledding down a hill. And based on that, we can make inferences about your reaction time and your momentary attention capacity. So we thought this was a little bit more engaging than just filling out surveys. People agreed it was more engaging, but they still didn't want to use it. So we applied for a whole bunch of grants trying to get some funding in order to really get this idea off the ground. We were successful in receiving a grant from Campus Alberta Neuroscience for neuroscience-related entrepreneur endeavors. So this really helped us get things off the ground. So based on that, we were able to get that $30,000 grant. In order to receive that money, we incorporated as a company. So that was a big step for us at the time. And we also participated in the Launchpad 2020 event here. And we actually won People's Choice in that event. So this starts to become a little bit of a bigger part of the story. Next slide, please. So over the course of while we're still in those early days, we needed to try to build a bit of brand recognition. And since I had a background in doing training and education around mental health, and my business partner had experience hosting virtual events, we decided to host some community-free events out in the public, just try to educate people on some of the principles of the neuroscience around mental health and how they could be more proactive for doing that. And one of the talks that we got a lot of very positive feedback for was about ADHD and entrepreneurship. So I'm going to get into this a little bit greater detail in a few minutes, but just to start saying that this is, again, where some of the social contract values started to play in. So we were doing this free for the community because we wanted to pay it forward. I do firmly believe that this information is very valuable and helpful for people to know. So we just wanted to try to get that information out into the community and see how it could start helping people and changing people's mind and trying to make the workplace a bit more inclusive for those that might be struggling with mental health challenges one way or the other. As part of that prize pack from Launchpad, we actually got a 6-month membership for free with the Work Nicer co-working space. So we were really grateful for that. It gave me a safe space to finish up my PhD because I had moved back to Calgary at the time. I was doing my PhD at the University of Utah. And we started to get much more connected with the local innovation community, starting to talk with other people And our customer discovery process really started accelerating. We're able to make a lot of really important connections. And now we're really pleased to say that we're able to pay it back forward. And we're hosting these events out of the Work Nicer space in the rail yards, not too far from here. So if anyone happens to be free tomorrow at 4:30, you can come actually learn about that ADHD and entrepreneurship talk that I was mentioning a few slides ago. So again, this is one of the ways we're trying to pay it forward and really start changing the impact. But you're probably here to hear a little bit more about the technology that we're developing. So next slide, please. So just more recently, we were successful in receiving the Alberta Innovates digital traction funding. So this is another really big milestone for us, because between those couple of grants that I mentioned and a few wage subsidies, at this point, we've been able to raise over $120,000 in non-dilutive funding to take what was originally my idea for a science experiment, quite literally, and turned it into a platform that could actually start helping people. So in that time, we were able to launch our first live MVP. It had some bugs, particularly if you use an iPhone. We're able to get through that now. And more importantly, we're able to start taking all those student volunteers that have been working with us since the beginning and start paying them for their time and energy that they're contributing towards us. So that felt really good for me, because I felt like now it's actually starting to contribute back towards the ecosystem in that way. And we're not saying, please do something for me, but also here's an exchange. I want to make sure that you're properly compensated for the hard work and time you're putting into this project. Yeah, I think that's everything on that slide. Next one. So because I'm a scientist, I can't help but put a little bit of science education into this talk. So this is going to come around for exactly what our app is measuring. But one of my favorite brain structures is called the Cingula Cortex. It's highlighted in red on the screen behind me. And it's part of a broader network that I like to call the focus network. And that's because it's a lot easier to say than the frontal apicular cinguloparietal network. Say that a few times fast. As you saw, even I stumbled a little bit about it. I'm used to just typing that. So this focus network does a lot of really important things for us, particularly for all of us as professionals. Next slide, please. So the first thing that it does is it allows us to override our prepotent inhibitions. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many people are able to eat a single Lay's potato chip? I'm not holding my hand up. So we got 3 people over there. Congratulations, your focus network is functioning very well. To the rest of us, when you eat that one potato chip and you're like, oh, I just want a second one, you know you probably shouldn't do that. And it's your focus network having a bit of a glitch, a misfire that's allowing you to have that second potato chip, or in my case, eat the whole bag. Next slide, please. But that's not all this network does for us. It also allows us to engage in complex planning. So to anyone that's a professional, this is invaluable and probably a critical part of your day-to-day experiences as a professional. So if you're a knowledge worker, this is synthesizing all that information. It's planning out your to-do list for the day. It's thinking, what sequence of people you're going to phone in order to do your sales targets, all those sorts of things. So really important for us in that regard is being able to plan out those really complex things. Next slide, please. And then additionally, because our focus network, it literally helps us focus. It allows us to have attention to detail, and it's really activated quite a bit when we're doing meditation, other types of experiences like that. So if your job requires detail orientatedness, you really want your focus network to be at its peak capacity. So if you're tired, your mental health isn't doing particularly well, and this network is kind of meh, you might let typos pop through on your communications. You might let bugs pop into the code you're submitting, all those sorts of things that can start to have consequences for us, which really behooves us for trying to make sure that this network is functioning at its peak capacity. Next slide, please. So before I return back to our app a little bit, I want to turn it back to the audience, and this can extend to the people that are on Zoom. What do you use your focus network for in your life? Anyone want to raise their hand and let me know?
Coming down the hill on my fat
Anything
bike.
that's coming in on the chats?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Ty, it's Pete.
Exactly.
I use my frontal lobe for making.
Oh no,
sure
100%.
I don't
Yeah,
smash.
a lot of us kind of
trees.
outsource that duty to our calendars, but it's our focus network that reminds us to check the calendars to remember that things exist. Yeah, so that's a good example. Anyone else? Yeah. Pardon? Exactly. So to those of you who might not have been able to hear, it was all about really trying to stay organized and focused. So when you were researching an idea, keeping all the things straight, keeping them organized, and that way you can share it with someone else and it's not a jumbled mess, like the first idea that we had in that hackathon competition. Okay. Awesome. Next slide, please. So now that we have a bit of appreciation on what our focus network does for us, that sledding game that we designed was specifically created to try to tap into the functionality of the focus network. So based on how quickly you're dodging those obstacles, we can start to make inferences about your reaction time and your momentary attention capacity. What this means as far as neuroscience terms is under ideal circumstances, we want these wavy lines to be like your brain waves, where everything's in sync, everything's coordinated, and you're able to go through your to-do list and your complex planning, and it's not a big deal. Next slide, please. What happens if your mental health isn't properly in, one back. What happens if your focus network isn't properly optimal is there's little miscommunications. Certain parts of the network aren't communicating with other ones, and you get little lost packages. You have little lapses of attention. And normally this isn't a big deal. You're able to compensate that very quickly. If you realize like, oh crap, I have a Zoom meeting in 5 minutes, you're able to still get onto your Zoom meeting and there's no harm done. But when you're playing this game, when you have one of those little lapses of attention, that manifests as hitting one of those barriers. So we're able to use that as a way to try to get an objective indicator on how well your attention capacity is in the moment. So this is how we're able to start making more objective indicators about people's momentary mental health. Next slide, please. And this is where it comes back to that theme that I talked about with it being inclusive in the workplace as it relates to mental health challenges. So ADHD is a condition, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder that most people tend to be born with, and then it reflects the way in which our brain develops. And in very early stages of life, our brain is trying to make decisions over what kind of world are we going to be living into, and how can we adapt to be optimally thriving in that environment. So if you come from a family of doctors and lawyers and more white collar kinds of professions, your brain is going to want to press the button on the left and optimize for reading books, because that's going to be really adaptive for the kinds of environments you're likely going to have in your early childhood. Whereas if you've had a little bit of a more tougher background for any number of reasons, there's a little bit of uncertainty, there's some scarcity. It turns out that focusing on reading books might not be particularly adaptive. Instead, scanning the environment for threats is evolutionarily what our brain thinks is more appropriate for those kinds of circumstances. So it develops accordingly. And for the most part, we've been taught that these are deficits. They're problems that people have. Whereas if you look about it from an evolutionary perspective, that's actually not the case. There's trade-offs in place. Next slide, please. So I like to think about ADHD as actually being a set of superpowers where if you have the right environment, these can really propel you towards success. So to start off with, because a lot of people with ADHD may have had some tough childhoods, they're often accustomed to working in stressful environments. In fact, they might not thrive if they don't have some degree of stress in their life. This counts for me as well. There's a reason that I decided to become a startup founder. So because of this, people with ADHD, they're really good at working under pressure. And what's more, they're also really geared towards taking risks. If you're in a slightly more uncertain scenario, not all the time is it going to be the case that rules are going to be followed and things are going to play out exactly as you want. So this pushes people into wanting to take risks because you never know, it might work out and that can be highly beneficial. Normally, that's not the best approach to take in life. But if you're an entrepreneur, that is actually a very adaptive skill because that means you're going to be willing to put your life and your livelihood on the line in order to make your venture successful. So again, it's all about matching the environment that you're working with the way in which your brain wants to operate. And then the final thing comes back down to the focus network. So while people with ADHD that might struggle with focusing on reading a book for an extended period of time, that trade-off in their brain actually comes that they're much more effective at switching between tasks. So to anyone that's been a startup founder, you know that you have to go from, okay, I'm in sales mode, I'm in tech development mode, I'm in networking mode. And every time you have to make one of those transitions, normally there's a cognitive task that's implied for it as your brain literally has to switch over the way in which it's thinking and processing information. But for people with ADHD, they don't have that trade-off to nearly the same extent. They're able to much more rapidly switch between the different hats they have to wear as a startup founder. So the point of the talk I'll be going through tomorrow is a lot greater detail in exactly fleshing out that story and how having ADHD is actually secretly a superpower for entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. And in fact, to really illustrate this point, this is a peer-reviewed paper that found that they did a survey of students, and those that had ADHD were twice as likely to want to start their own business. So it really goes to show that this is a trade-off, and if we can just find ways to support these people and not necessarily discourage them just because their brains are organized a little bit differently, we can really start to catalyze the innovation ecosystem here in Alberta. Next slide, please. So going back to this ugly slide, so at this point, we've actually refined our idea quite a bit better. So now we've identified how we're going to take these statistics that I was really interested in and applying them into the app using this gamified micro game that measures your attention capacity. Next slide, please. So this probably, with the exception of the pixelated arrow, is a little bit easier to understand. And again, this comes back to some of the social contract values from the rainforest. So basically, when you're doing psychological assessment traditionally, usually it's painting a very detailed picture of your mental health at a particular point in time. Thank you. There we go. Where was I? So normally, when I was trained for doing clinical assessments as part of my PhD, it would be a very detailed picture at one particular time point. We would bring the patient into the clinic. We would get them to do an extensive interview. If it's relevant, we get their medical history, do a bunch of questionnaires and some of the cognitive testing to look at their attention, those sorts of things. But the problem is that that assessment might not necessarily be accurate 1 or 2 months down the road because life is dynamic, things are constantly changing. So instead, using the statistical approach that I was learning about during my PhD, what we're doing is we're taking a snapshot of people repeatedly. So for 10 minutes a day, people can log into our app, check in with their emotions, play that mini game, and we can get one data point that then forms a time series. We can apply those statistics in the ugly picture on the last slide and make much more nuanced insight into how people are doing in their daily life and start looking at how lifestyle factors could influence your attention one way or the other. And this is where it comes back to the rainforest social contracts values, is that we want to pay it forward. We got a lot of community help in trying to develop Bit Cortex up until this point. So right now our app is freely available for anyone to check out and to start learning what are the aspects of their lifestyle that are more helpful for them. And ultimately, this is going towards the value of diversity and trying to help people understand that even though if their brain has a trade-off and might function a little differently from the typical person, there's still a place for them in the workplace, and their unique flavor of brain diversity can actually be an asset for them, and trying to help people discover what those assets are. Next slide, please. So more or less, this is kind of what our roadmap for the next little while looks like. I could try on a linear path, but I thought this was a little bit more exciting for this group. So more or less, we have an MVP of our app up online, but it's got some limitations right now. Namely, our algorithms are unvalidated. So in order to validate them, we need to get people using our app for a period of time. And in order to do that, then we can collect the data. And that's where the cycle starts. So on the left here, we need to grow our daily active users. As we're doing that, we're going to be accumulating the data to validate our algorithm. But in order for people to do that, they need to actually find value in our app. Again, going back to what I was saying earlier, people don't inherently want to fill out surveys. So we've been working with doing beta testing, listening to end users, trying to figure out exactly what features they're looking for so we can start iterating to provide value for the community in that way. And then as we learn what they want, we'll be collecting their data, and then we can start validating our algorithms and being able to certify, like, actually, yes, when we see these patterns, it means you're at risk for burnout, your mental health is likely on a decline. So let's try to do things proactively to help you mitigate that challenge before it even happens. It probably isn't, it's probably common sense to think about if you have a problem that's up and coming, the more proactive you are, the less time, energy, money, and resources it's going to take to resolve that problem. And your mental health is going to be better in the process along the way. So once we start to validate our algorithms, then we can actually take this into the workplace and start working with some of our early adopter customers and trying to identify and solve their pain points when it comes to mental health challenges in the workplace. So that'll be extremely validating in and of itself. And it'll help encourage the adoption of neurodiversity as a diversity inclusion principle within the workplace. And the more that we're able to do that, we'll start getting some extra money, some extra capital, and that'll allow us to start iterating our app even more to really start improving the number of people using our app. And then it starts the whole cycle over again. So this is really where we're at, and where I think the rainforest is a good example of where the valleys come in. Because at each stage along here, there's something that we're trying to give towards the community, and in turn, the community is giving towards us. And then with each iteration of the cycle, we're in a better position to do better for the next iteration. Next slide, please. So right now we're launching a number of individual services. So as I previously mentioned, we have the app available, and right now it's freely available for everyone. We are looking into ways we could potentially monetize a premium version of it, but that's a little bit down the road. If you want to check out the app, on the next slide, there's going to be a QR code that you can use in order to get access to it from there. Additionally, we have a number of surveys on the app where we can start collecting individual risk factors about people. In my case, since I've got a little bit of a clinical training, I'm really interested in personality profiles. How many people have taken the Myers-Briggs? Okay, so we use the Ocean model. It's like Myers-Briggs, but with better scientific support. Not to say that if you're really fond of that one, it's not valuable, but just there's variability in the quality of that survey, and I have a PhD in trying to evaluate that quality, and sometimes I find it difficult. So I just stay safe and use the Ocean model. So we can do personality consultations with individuals, with pairs of people, whether they be romantic partners, business partners, or just people on a team together, to try to figure out where people are aligned with their personalities, where there may be some discrepancies, and as a result, there may be some possibility for tensions, and how we can use that data to try to help people communicate more effectively and collaborate more cohesively. And ultimately, we think that if this is applied in a workplace setting, it'll help improve productivity, because people understand that the diversity on their team is actually a source of strength. And it's not one person being different just because, but it's actually they have a very nuanced perspective that can be valuable and needs to be heard. Additionally, if you like some of the things that you've heard so far, we also do lunch and learns and half-day workshops on the idea of being inclusive in the workplace for different neurodiverse people. So cycling through different mental health conditions, as well as things that can benefit everybody, like meditation and being aware of personality profiles, those sorts of things. And then where we're just starting to do a bit of a soft launch now is actually using our app in order to do a 7-day pilot with companies to start collecting the data from their employees and applying those analytics to them in order to start validating our algorithms and giving them the first stage of the feedback that we can potentially offer. So we're trying to go to the next level of supporting their wellness goals. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to try out the personality consultations, you can scan the QR code there. This is an example of what the profile could look like. And relevant for ADHD, extroversion is one of the most relevant personality dimensions for that. So it all starts to tie together because like an innovation ecosystem, our brain is a network and everything's connected to everything else. So the more that you start to understand one node in your brain, the more you're going to start to understand the rest of the network. And overall, we hope that that insight will allow you to have more actionable plans to be proactive about your mental health. Next slide, please. Additionally, we've got a number of events, as I mentioned. The series, the Burnout Beer, is happening out of Work Nice from the Rail Yards location. So in a few weeks, we're actually going to do one from the 17th application on personal dynamics in the workplace. So if you'd like to sign up for that, again, you can scan the QR code there. I heard someone really smart say if you want people to do things, list it 3 times. So the fact that the QR code is there a few times is probably an indicator. From there, you'll also be able to get access to the current version of our app that's online right now. If you use it, we would love the feedback. We got it set up so digital service you're using should automatically prompt you for feedback on certain pages. So again, we're really just trying to get in the process of iterating, getting more people exploring, checking it out. Next slide, please. And this slide is actually different from the first one. So on that point, thank you very much for listening to me speak. And on that note, I'd be happy to take any questions if we have a few minutes.
So if I unmute here, can you hear me, Zoomers? Cool. Okay. Is this iOS, Android, PWA, question mark?
A PWA. To those who don't understand the jargon, we're building as a progressive web app because we can build it to go through the browser. But if you open it on your phone thinks it's an app. So it looks and feels like an app. And this allows us to develop much more quickly relative to having a separate code base for iOS and Android. I know there's lots of iPhone users out there, but Apple really irritates me because their business model is great user experience, don't play well with other people. So that complicated our development a bit. Yeah. Oh, so for everybody on Zoom, the question was about using QR codes and trying to manage the survey burnout that a lot of people often experience. So for all the surveys we currently have on our app, we were very, very thoughtful in making them as short as possible. So more or less, without going into too many details, there's statistics about how well a survey will measure what you want it to measure and and whether or not it'll measure that reliably. So we tried to do a trade-off to find the shortest surveys possible that still have that good scientific evidence for being able to do that. So for example, for the personality surveys, you only have to answer 10 questions to find out how neurotic you are. I say that with love. Neuroticism, we did that a couple weeks ago for Burnout Beer. They're the people that are very proactive about appreciating danger and avoiding danger. So they're really good at risk management. Next time you hire a lawyer, if they're not a little neurotic, keep your eyes open. Yeah. 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 So that's a really good question. To those of you who weren't on Zoom, the question was about the difference between a user versus a customer. So really, businesses are our customer because we're trying to provide our consultation service and our technology as eventually an automated workplace wellness tool for them, mainly for HR departments. But the people actually using the app on a daily basis will be employees or general people in the community. So there is kind of two different pools of stakeholders there. So the way that we're trying to bridge that is for individual people, we're actually not really concerned about their productivity from their end. We just want to help them get the information strategies to improve their mental health and wellness. So given the actual insight, they need to be more proactive about are there any potential upcoming mental health challenges and learning about what their personal tendencies and lifestyle factors that work for them are. So the idea is support the individual person, and then when their mental health is in a better place, they will become a more productive person for the company. But then on the company's end, we still do have to make sure that we're respecting the privacy of each individual employees. So companies will not receive any individual data for their employees, only at the aggregate or group level. So right now our policy is that we won't show data for less than 5 people. So that way you can't possibly identify somebody as having poor mental health and then try to filter them out through one mechanism or another. So we really want to make sure that people are empowered if they have a mental health challenge and not penalized for it. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess there's kind of 2 questions there to those of you on Zoom. So the one was, while I talked about ADHD in this talk, does our strategy generalize to other mental health conditions and challenges? And then, sorry, remind me what the second question was? Yeah. And then whether or not we'll apply strategies in order to help those people as well. The answer is yes and yes. So the approach that I learned when I was during my PhD is what's called transdiagnostic. So it really means don't get hung up on the label. Don't get hung up as ADHD versus depression versus anxiety, because realistically, it's all kind of messy and all together when you look at it in the brain. People with ADHD are often at risk for other mental health challenges, whether it be anxiety or depression. 70% of people with depression also have anxiety. So right from the get-go, we wanted to make sure that our solution would not be based on one particular diagnostic angle. This also helps us out for healthcare regulations. Basically, and then in order to help those people, whenever they complete a survey on our app, they get a slideshow that goes through based on their score, and it gives them a personalized wellness tip. So if you were to go through and find out that you are a neurotic person, then we'll give you some strategies for how you can become slightly less neurotic if that would be helpful for you in different situations. So for example, relaxation techniques, you mentioned meditation. Meditation is wonderful. It's the one thing that no matter what mental health challenge you have, meditation tends to make it better, along with physical activity. Those are two things that are invaluable. So if you're struggling with mental health in any way, adding those two things to your lifestyle, all the science suggests it will make things better. You just might have to give a little bit of time for those to take effect. Physical activity, exercise. Yeah, how many people cycle commute? Oh, I got a few people there. Yeah, so congratulations, you're doing really good things to your brain right now. Talk to your counselor, your MLA, and let's get more bike paths built in Calgary. Overall, it helps. Awesome. Yeah, hopefully that wasn't on for the people on Zoom. Any other questions?
If you don't mind, I just want to say thank you to you for joining us today in person. That was fantastic. I want to save time and be cognizant of those on Zoom who always love to get into breakout rooms and meet each other. So we will head into networking for them on Zoom and for us here live and in person. However, we'll just do community announcements before we do that so that everyone can just go on their way afterwards. So again, just want to say thank you to Ty and thank you to Platform and Michael on the Platform team who made this incredibly seamless other than dropping the microphone. Yeah. Who else do we have to thank? Oh, I wanted to make special mention of Rachel Wade, who is the DE&I expert who has helped us on our scorecard revamp this year and who many of you have seen speak at Lunch Without Lunch a few times because it's her birthday. Happy birthday, Rachel. And other announcements from us in the Rainforest are that Amber and I are going to be taking a course which just happens to run over Wednesday noon hour through April to June. And so if anyone would like to volunteer and help out in facilitating Lunch Without Lunch, connect with us and we can set you up for that. It's pretty straightforward if you don't break anything. Any other announcements from the folks here? Peter Lafontaine does want to share that he is doing, he mentioned it last week, the a branch out bike tour in Invermere. It's gotten buried in here, so I will get that information. Anyone in the live audience have community announcements they'd like to share? Yes. Softball, for those on Zoom, anyone would like to join the softball, YYC Tech softball, we'll put it in our Slack after today as well. I think we have one other one. Civic Tech YYC, April 12th at 7 p.m. It will be on solar energy this time around. Yes, Annette. Awesome. So 4 to 5 Tuesdays, Tech Talent Tuesdays, Platform and Tech West Collective. I think I covered it. All right. Anyone else? Yes, Al Del Dagan. Yeah. So again, if you'd like to be a host or a guest or just help take part in the Libby podcast, Al would like your support. And he has a lovely new banner here that maybe we'll take a picture of and put it in the Slack so everybody can see it. So for those on Zoom, we will probably have time for a couple, probably 2 breakout sessions. So Amber is going to work on getting those set up. Alan's asking, when is the solar energy? It's in the chat, Alan, so you can check that out there. And for those of you who are sticking around to network, I'll thank Megan from SADT for this idea. I'll challenge you all to meet 3 new people. I can't awkwardly shove you into a breakout room with people you don't know. So if you could make an effort to meet 3 new people today, that would be very rainforest of you. So thanks for joining us in person. And by the looks of things, I think we'll probably start doing this the last Wednesday of every month. Sadly, I won't be with you often because I live in Squamish, but Amber will be doing that. And if anyone would like to help her volunteer to get those off the ground for the last Wednesday of every month, that would be great. And Terry Rock has something to say. Awesome. So any ideas for how Platform can best utilize the Innovation Center, please contact Platform. And for those who are still in the Zoom room, thank you for your patience through this bit of a test today. So enjoy the breakouts, enjoy the networking, have an awesome week. Thanks, Ty.